Hey everybody, it's Hans here with Anglers Covey. Welcome back to our Bug of the Month video. It is February, and this month, our Bug of the Month is not even a bug at all, actually. It's the egg. So in this video, we're going to cover why trout eat eggs, how eggs end up in the river, how we like to rig our egg patterns, and if you stick around to the end, we'll go over 3 favorite flies for fishing eggs. Alright, so how do eggs end up in the river? Well, during the spawning process, a male and a female are going to pair up. They're going to clean out a section of the riverbed where they're going to deposit their eggs, or the female will, and then the male is going to come over and fertilize those eggs. And then they're going to cover them back up. And during that whole spawning process, not all of the eggs are sticking in the bottom of the river, and so they're going to be free-flowing eggs coming down current that are very easy pickings for the trout. Now you're going to set up your rig when you're fishing eggs just like you would any other standard nymph rig. So what I've got today is I've got an indicator at the end of a butt section up here, and I'm running about 7 feet or so to my furthest fly. I've got most of my weight in the bottom 2 flies here, and then I've got on this top dropper tag a nice lightly or unweighted nuke egg. So we're trying to get some fish to eat eggs today. That's why I'm running 3 here. All right, so we're going to talk a minute here about pegging beads and how to rig them and rig them properly. So I've got a little example here of a pegged bead. Now, something that's very important is to keep the distance between the hook and the egg no more than 2 fingers. So you can see here, it's about a 2-finger width there. And that's going to ensure when a fish comes and eats the egg, you're going to set the hook, and that hook's going to get them right in the outside of the lip, not causing any damage to the fish. One of the biggest problems we see is when people are running these hooks further from the egg, you know, 4 inches or so, the fish eats that hook, or the fish eats the egg, you have this hook flailing back here, you're susceptible to hooking them in the gill plate or the eye and really doing more damage to the fish than we need to be. Now, something else I want to touch on is using the proper hook. We want to make sure we're not using anything too big here. Myself and most everybody at Anglers Covey likes to use a 24-88H, no bigger than a size 16, with the barb pinched. One of the reasons we want to make sure we're not using too big of a hook here is because larger hooks with larger hook gaps you're gonna have more opportunities to hook fish, you know, and tear up their mandible or potentially hook them in the head or the gill plate or the eye and do damage to those fish, which we don't want to be doing. Also, a bigger hook is going to add more weight, and the whole thing about these pegged beads is they have a neutral buoyancy, so they float down river looking as natural as possible. If you're fishing a big hook behind that pegged bead, it's going to be pulling that thing down, and you're not going to get the drift that you're looking for. All right, so the first method we're going to talk about, we're going to grab some Umpqua Deceiver X in the 3X here. This stuff is absolutely killer. It's super abrasion resistant, and I have never had this stuff break off on the bead when we're doing this first technique. We're going to take our tippet and you're going to thread it through the bead. And we're going to go through 3 times here when we do this, okay? So I'm going to give myself 5 or 6 inches to work with here. Come with that tip, go through again. Okay, and then we'll go through a 3rd time here. And this is going to keep the bead in place. The bead's never going to slip once you have this on here. Now, you do need to make sure you're using a thicker tippet when we do this, because thinner tippets are going to be more susceptible to breaking. So I've got 3X here. Now we're going to take our 24-88 and the H in the 16, and we're going to thread that on. Now when I start this knot, I want that hook closer than I'm going to be actually fishing, and that's because when I tighten the knot, there's going to be more room in between the hook and the bead. So I'm going to give just about 1 inch, and we're going to do a 5-turn clinch here. Come back through. Now, once I get it mostly secured, I'm going to moisten. When I tighten, we have about that 2-finger distance, exactly what we're looking for there. All right, so let's talk some pros and cons of this method. Some of the benefits are you don't have to have any additional items with you to rig this up. All you need is a hook and a bead. Another one is that bead's never going to move. Once you wrap that tippet through 3 times, it's solid and it's not going anywhere. Now, one of the cons, if you will, to this is you've got to use thicker tippet if you're going to wrap it through the bead 3 times. If you use thinner tippet, 4X, 5X, you're going to be susceptible to breaking off right where it goes through the bead. All right, so for the next method, we're gonna use these trout bead pegs, and this gives us the ability to use finer tippet. So for the next tippet we're gonna use is this Umpqua Phantom X and 4X. It's absolutely awesome, some of my favorite fluorocarbon material. This stuff is invisible to the trout. It's got a great abrasion resistance. One of my favorite tippets on the market. So we're gonna get 16 inches to start out here. Okay, so we've got our 16 inches of tippet. We're gonna start by threading the tippet through the hole in the bead here. Now the cool thing about this method is I'm able to slide the bead once I get it on, so I don't have to do any measuring beforehand. So I'm just gonna hold that bead on the tippet there. I'll get the peg, the trout bead pegs. I'm gonna thread that through the hook. Now this is tapered, so you can see that went through pretty easily. It gets thicker in the middle here. I'm gonna pull until that sits nice and snug. Once it's in there, you grab your nippers. Okay, so once it's in there, we'll grab our nippers. You're just gonna trim off these pegs right next to the bead. Make sure you keep your waist. Now we're gonna attach a hook. Okay, so I've got my 2488H in a size 16 here with the barb pinched. We'll thread this on. We're gonna do a 5-turn clinch here. Moisten and tighten. And trim the tag here. Now you can see I can take this bead now and slide it into position. So I want this to sit 2 inches from that hook. So I'm going to slide it down till I have about that 2-finger width that we talked about before, and that's perfect. This is a much better option for finer tippets if you're fishing to weary trout in very technical tail waters. All right, so let's talk a minute here about bead organization. Beads aren't like normal flies, so you can't put them in a regular fly box into the little slots. We really like these Umpqua bug lockers. They give you 6 different compartments so you can organize your beads and keep different colors and keep hooks in the separate compartment itself. So these have seemed to be absolutely stellar for us as my preferred way of carrying and organizing my beads. Now, when we're fishing egg patterns, where you fish absolutely matters. So if you're going along the river and you see a section of the river that looks like it's been cleaned or is brighter than the other sections of the river, or sometimes it looks like someone took a vacuum and swept or sucked up all the moss, that's a spawning bed. You absolutely should never ever fish to fish that are on a bed. If you see fish that are on a bed, it either means they are getting ready to spawn, they just spawned, or they are actively in the process of spawning. It is extremely unethical to fish to those fish. So what we want to do is we want to head downstream to a bucket, far downstream from that red, and we're going to fish through that area because there are going to be trout sitting in those buckets that are going to be feeding on the eggs that are not getting deposited in the bottom of the river. All right, so we have this red probably 30 yards upriver here. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to grid off this little bucket below it and run those eggs through every lane in here. Let's see if I can find a fish. All right, we got a nice fish here on an egg. So when you're fighting these fish, you want to make sure you're giving side pressure, not just lifting them. That's going to help tire them out if they have to fight perpendicular to the current, rather than just lifting them in place. All right, beautiful brown trout. All right, so I want to talk to you guys for a quick second here just about fish handling. We want to keep the fish in the water as much as possible. When you're going to handle them, you need to make sure you wet your hand first. Now, it's absolutely okay to get a picture of a fish that you catch. Just make sure your camera person is prepared beforehand. And then when we're going to release this fish, we want to face him upstream into the current. We're just going to hold him there until he kicks off. No need to shake him back and forth or anything like that. Quick out of the water. Now let him go. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of leaving fish alone that are on the reds. Absolutely imperative to the future generations of the fish in our fisheries that we leave those fish alone and let them spawn. Alright, so now let's talk about our 3 favorite flies for fishing eggs. First one we're going to talk about here is a pattern recently picked up by Umpqua that I developed. It's called the Sunny Side Up. The great thing about this fly is it gives you that egg shape and look, but it gives you the weight needed to use an egg fly as an anchor fly. So it's great for Euro nymphing or as a lead fly on a typical indicator rig. The next one over here is your pegged bead. The great thing about these pegged beads is they look very, very real and they have a neutral buoyancy, so they float down the river and look extremely natural. And then the final one we'll talk about is the nuke egg. The benefit to the nuke egg is you can tie these very, very small and they look very natural with that egg veil on top. Gives it a bit translucency. So it's got a great realistic texture. Fish are going to tend to want to hold on to that one a little longer. So that concludes our bug of the month for February. Make sure you stay tuned for our bug of the month next month, which is going to be the sculpin. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below or always come into the shop and see me. We'll see you next time.